Thanksgiving, or giving thanks, is quite simply that, thanking God. And since many of us have been brought up knowing our P's and Q's and that we should always be polite and say thank you, this may seem oddly out of place among the other areas of spiritual discipline. How could saying thanks to God in any way be considered a discipline when considered alongside such labours of love as Bible study, fasting and battling temptation? And apart from ensuring we're not inadvertently rude to God, what possible benefit could there be to Thanksgiving? In addition to being taught to be polite in general company, many of us will have been taught to say grace as well before meals. Saying grace is undoubtedly the most common Thanksgiving exercise among Christians, and it involves saying a short prayer of thanks to God for the provision of the about-to-be-eaten meal. Now, while this may seem a very simplistic exercise, it actually contains all the ingredients necessary for this area of spiritual discipline. Firstly, there is something we have received, specifically food. And giving thanks involves first recognising that we have been given this by God. Secondly, we give thanks before eating, not as like some magic spell of protection against food poisoning, but because it suggests we have faith that no matter what this meal is actually like, God has provided it for our good. These two simple principles, trusting that what we have received comes from God and believing that it is for our good, are at the heart of Thanksgiving. And when we apply them to life in general, suddenly it seems a bit more of a discipline than at first glance. In his first letter to the Thessalonians, Paul told them to give thanks in all circumstances. And note just how comprehensive that is, all circumstances. Not just those circumstances that seem good to us, but all circumstances. The good, the bad, and everything in between. Applying our principles to the good times is easy. Of course we can see that this is God's provision. Of course we can believe that God has provided for our good. And in such times it is important to practice thanksgiving and help to develop a mindset that God really does provide for you and really does work for your good. Because eventually there will be difficult and dark times. It's inevitable. As Jesus said, in this world you will have many troubles. And it is at times such as these that this area of spiritual discipline really starts to shape our relationship with God. Our natural reaction when things are not going well is not usually one of thanks. And how can you be thankful when you lose your job, when you see those you love go through illness, when you lose your house, or when you're hurt by your friends? How does thanking God for such things make any sense? Surely Job's wife had it right when she told her husband, who had lost his family, possessions and health, to curse God and die. And yet Job's response, even in the midst of the deepest possible pain, was, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In Romans 8:28, we have the most glorious promise that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. And again, note how comprehensive this is. In all things, whether they seem good or bad or somewhere in between, God is at work through them all to ensure good for those who love him. We may not be able to see how God is working things for the good, and we may never know. But thanksgiving involves accepting this as truth, that every situation we go through in life comes from God and is ultimately for good. And so thanking him even in the midst of darkness and misery. And as we do this, even though it is hard to do and to accept that this is really true, our faith in God's provision and in his power to fulfill his promise will grow. And we will learn to trust him even when everything else is falling away. So far from being childish and simple, thanksgiving is a powerful area of spiritual discipline that helps to forge our love for God through the furnaces of life.